April 4th, 1945, 10:47 in the morning. The convoy rolled through the German countryside like a river of steel. 37 tanks, 42 half-tracks, 116 trucks carrying ammunition fuel, and men who believed the war was almost over. Spring had arrived early that year, unseasonably warm. The trees exploded with new growth branches heavy with blossoms that looked like snow against the blue sky. Farmers' fields stretched endlessly on both sides of the narrow country lane, the earth freshly turned and ready for planting. The air smelled of fresh soil and possibility, of new beginnings. It was a day that felt like hope. The 4th Armored Division had been advancing for 6 straight days, covering ground faster than anyone thought possible. They'd liberated 12 towns in a week. The German resistance was collapsing like a house of cards. Young soldiers leaned out of truck beds smoking cigarettes, laughing at jokes that weren't funny. War makes men giddy when they think they might survive it. Makes them believe in futures they'd stopped imagining months ago. Someone had a radio playing. Glenn Miller's "In the Mood" drifted across the convoy. Incongruous. Perfect. The soundtrack of a world returning to normal. Then the convoy stopped. Not because of enemy fire, not because of roadblocks or blown bridges or any of the 1,000 obstacles that usually halted an army's progress. The convoy stopped because the driver of the lead jeep started vomiting. Then the driver behind him. Then another. Then 5 more in quick succession. Hardened men. Veterans of North Africa where the sun could kill you as easily as a bullet. Sicily where they'd fought house to house through ancient streets. Normandy where they'd waded through water turned red with blood. Men who'd seen friends blown apart by artillery. Men who'd walked through fields carpeted with corpses. Men whose hands no longer shook when they pulled a trigger. These men leaned over the sides of their vehicles and retched until their stomachs were empty, because they had encountered something they couldn't see. Something worse than bullets, or bombs, or the screaming chaos of combat. They had hit a wall, an invisible wall made of smell. Inside the command vehicle, General Marcus Steele caught the scent drifting through the open window. His nose wrinkled, his eyes narrowed. His first thought was practical, analytical wrong. "Chemical plant," he said to the aide sitting beside him. Lieutenant Morrison, good kid, Cornell graduate, spoke 3 languages. The young lieutenant looked green. His hands gripped the edge of his seat. "Sir, has to be, or maybe a rendering facility, processing dead horses into glue." Steele waved his hand dismissively. "The Wehrmacht retreats, they don't clean up their mess. Probably carcasses rotting somewhere nearby. Tell the drivers to push through it." But even as he said it, something in his gut twisted. This wasn't the smell of battlefield dead. He knew that smell intimately, had breathed it in for years until it became part of him. The sweet, sour stench of decomposition, the metallic tang of spilled blood, the acrid smoke of burning flesh. This was different, thicker, more concentrated, ancient and fresh at the same time, like death that had been happening for a very long time. Industrial death, processed death. "Find out what's causing this," Steele ordered. His voice carried the absolute authority of a man who'd commanded armies for 37 years. "I want answers in 15 minutes. The lieutenant saluted and disappeared. Steele sat back in his seat and stared out at the countryside. So peaceful, so utterly ordinary. Cherry trees in bloom, their branches heavy with white flowers. A farmhouse in the distance with laundry hanging on a line. White sheets flapping in the April breeze like surrender flags. Somewhere a rooster crowed, oblivious to the war that had torn this continent apart. The disconnect was staggering. Beauty and horror occupying the same space, the same moment. 60 years old, dying. That's how old Marcus Steele was on this April morning. 60 years of life, 37 years in uniform. 3 years, 7 months, and 12 days since America entered this war. He'd done the math this morning while shaving. Wondered if he'd see 61. Wondered if it mattered. The men called him old blood and guts. Not to his face. Never to his face. But he heard the whispers. Saw the looks. The mixture of fear and admiration and grudging respect that followed him like a shadow. Old blood and guts. The general who never stopped advancing. The man who moved faster than anyone thought possible. The warrior who thrived on chaos and speed and the raw mathematics of violence. He wore ivory-handled pistols on his hips. Not standard issue. Custom made. A gift to himself after North Africa when he'd turned Rommel's flank and sent the Africa Corps running. Beautiful weapons. Deadly. Symbolic. The ivory came from elephant tusks he'd hunted in Kenya before the war. Another lifetime ago. Another world. He kept his helmet polished to a mirror shine. His boots could reflect sunlight from 50 yards away. Soldiers joked they could use the general's boots for signaling aircraft. He carried a riding crop and affectation from another era and used it to point at maps at soldiers at objectives that needed taking. Everything about his appearance was theater. Calculated. Designed to inspire. The men loved him. The men hated him. Sometimes both at the same time. But they followed him. That was the important part. They followed him through hell because he always led from the front and he always brought them victory. He drove them hard, but he drove himself harder. Never asked them to do anything he wouldn't do first. 40,000 prisoners captured in the last 3 months. 600 miles covered in 3 weeks. Numbers that made the textbooks obsolete. Numbers that made other generals look slow and cautious and afraid. Numbers that had cost lives. His boys. Good men who'd never see home. Marcus Steele was not afraid, or rather he was terrified of exactly one thing: failure. Being wrong, making a mistake that cost lives unnecessarily. So he worked harder than everyone else, slept 3 hours a night, studied maps until his eyes burned, pushed faster and faster because speed saved lives. Speed ended wars. Speed brought boys home. And it worked. God help him, it worked. Until this moment, this April morning, when something invisible stopped his entire division in its tracks. The minutes crawled past. Steele checked his watch. A Patek Philippe. Expensive, his father's watch. Given to him the day that he graduated in West Point. Still keeping perfect time after all these years. 11:15, 11:20, 11:25. Where were his answers? He studied the map spread across his lap. They were 15 miles from their objective. A town called Weimar. Intel said light resistance. They'd be there by nightfall. Then another town, then another. Racing toward Berlin, racing toward the end. At 11:30, a jeep roared back down the line and skidded to a halt beside the command vehicle. The officer who climbed out looked like he'd aged 10 years in 30 minutes. His face was the color of old paper. His hands shook. His eyes stared at something that wasn't there. Something that would live behind those eyes forever. Steele recognized that look. He'd seen it on men who'd survived artillery barrages that killed everyone around them. Men who'd witnessed things their minds couldn't quite process. Things that broke something fundamental in the machinery of sanity. "General," the officer said. His voice came out wrong. Too high, too tight, like a string pulled to breaking. "You have to come see this." "Report, Captain." Steele's tone was sharp, controlled. The voice of command that could cut through chaos. The captain swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed. "Sir, don't know how to." He stopped, started again, failed again. "You won't believe it, sir. You have to see it for yourself." Steele studied the young man's face. Captain Thomas Richardson, 28 years old, from Boston, decorated twice, Purple Heart, Bronze Star. This was not a soldier who spooked easily. Steele had seen him advance under machine gun fire without flinching. But he was flinching now, trembling like a leaf. "Show me," Steele said. He grabbed his riding crop, settled his helmet, checked that his pistols were secure. The rituals of command, the armor of authority. They drove 2 miles down a dirt access road that curved through fields of new wheat, green shoots pushing up through brown earth. The cycle of life continuing despite everything. The smell grew stronger with every passing second, suffocating, physical, like trying to breathe through a wet blanket made of rot. Steele had smelled death before, plenty of times. Battlefields, field hospitals, mass graves hastily dug after major engagements. But this was different. This wasn't the clean death of combat. Quick, violent, over. This was prolonged, systematic, industrial. Steele didn't gag. He'd trained himself years ago to control his body's autonomic responses. Mind over matter, will over weakness. But his jaw clenched, his nostrils flared. His free hand gripped the side of the Jeep hard enough to hurt, hard enough that his knuckles went white. Captain Richardson drove in silence. What was there to say? At 12:15 they arrived. The sign said Orangeroof, metal letters, still attached to the gatepost, as if this place had a name, as if naming it made it real. Barbed wire, coiled, rusted, stretching in both directions as far as the eye could see. Guard towers every 100 yards. Empty now, abandoned. But the machine guns still pointed inward. Not to keep people out, to keep them in. A gate hanging open. Buildings that looked ordinary from the outside. Gray concrete. Functional. Nothing remarkable. Could have been a factory, a warehouse, a military depot. Except for the smell and the silence and the sense that something fundamental about the world had broken inside this place. It's a sub-camp, Captain Richardson explained as they walked through the gate. His voice was hollow, mechanical. Part of Buchenwald. The SS guards fled yesterday morning, left everything behind, took their personal effects but left the rest. Steele said nothing. His eyes scanned the compound with a soldier's eye. Defensive positions, firing lanes, escape routes, weaknesses in the perimeter. But something was wrong with his analysis. This wasn't a military installation. The towers faced inward. The wire was designed to contain, not defend. The buildings had no firing ports, no defensive positions. This was something else entirely. A prison. But prisons didn't smell like this, didn't have that particular architecture of despair. They rounded a corner past the first barracks building, and Marcus Steele, the general who'd walked across battlefields where 10,000 men died in a single day, the warrior who'd seen corpses stacked like sandbags at Normandy, the commander who thought he was immune to shock, who'd witnessed every variation of human death that war could devise. Marcus Steele stopped walking. His breath caught in his throat. His vision narrowed to a tunnel. And for the first time in 37 years of military service, his body betrayed him. He turned, walked quickly behind his shed. His riding crop fell from nerveless fingers, bent over, and vomited until there was nothing left inside him. The bodies were stacked like cordwood. That's the phrase that kept running through his mind as he straightened up, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and forced himself to look again, to really see what was in front of him. Stacked like cordwood. 20 bodies, 30, maybe 40. It was hard to count because they were tangled together in obscene intimacy. Naked skeletal, covered with a thin layer of white powder that he recognized as quicklime. The SS had tried to dissolve the evidence, speed up decomposition, erase their crimes, but they'd run out of time. Or quicklime, or both. So the bodies remained, piled with geometric precision. Someone had stacked them carefully, neatly, with German efficiency. All shot in the back of the head, the exit wounds visible even from a distance. Perfect execution. No wasted ammunition. These weren't soldiers. These weren't casualties of combat. These weren't men who died fighting with honor and weapons in their hands. These were murders. Systematic, methodical, recent. The blood was still dark, still tacky. Steele walked forward on legs that felt numb, like he was floating, like this wasn't real. His captain stayed back, unable to follow, unable to look again at what he'd already seen. The general moved alone through this landscape of atrocity, his polished boots crunching on gravel mixed with bone fragments, mixed with things he didn't want to identify. The roll call square. That's what Captain Richardson had called it, where prisoners were forced to stand for hours in all weather while the guards counted them. Counted them like inventory, like objects, like numbers in a ledger. Counted them until they collapsed. And when they collapsed, they were shot. Simple mathematics, brutal efficiency, no appeals, no trials, no mercy. Steele's military mind cataloged the details automatically. He couldn't help it. 37 years of training, the guard towers positioned for overlapping fields of fire, the electric fence still humming with power, the drainage system designed to wash away blood, the architectural precision of it all. Someone had designed this, sat at a drafting table with pencils and rulers and drew up blueprints, calculated load-bearing capacities, ordered materials, supervised construction. Someone had built hell with German engineering excellence. Someone had thought about every detail, planned every system, optimized every process. For murder. General. The voice came from his left, soft, hesitant, speaking English with a thick accent. Polish maybe, or Czech. Steele turned. What he saw wasn't a man, not anymore. Not in any recognizable sense of what constituted humanity. A skeleton wrapped in parchment skin, eyes too large for the skull, sunken, hollow, but aware, still human despite everything. Arms like sticks, legs like broom handles, wearing a striped uniform that hung on a frame that might have weighed 70 pounds, 68 to be precise. They'd weigh him later, record it, document it. Proof. The figure tried to move forward, couldn't, fell to its knees, crawled, hands like claws scrabbling in the dirt, reached for Steele's boots, those perfectly polished boots that reflected sunlight, tried to kiss them. And General Marcus Steele, who'd maintained perfect military bearing through 3 years of war, who never showed weakness, who embodied strength and command and absolute authority, who'd stood unmoved while artillery fell around him and men died screaming. General Marcus Steele went down on one knee in the dirt, put his hands under the man's arms, felt bones, just bones and skin, nothing else, lifted him gently to his feet, afraid, genuinely afraid that touching too hard would cause the man to shatter into pieces, and cried. The tears came without permission, without warning, without any possibility of control. They streamed down his weathered face while he held this broken stranger upright, one hand supporting his back, the other gripping his arm so gently, so carefully. Thank you, the man whispered. His voice was paper-thin, fragile. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Each word an effort, each syllable proof that he was still alive, still capable of speech, still human. What's your name? Steele's voice was hoarse, broken. David Levin. How old are you, David? 30, I think. Hard to remember. A pause. What month is it? April 4th. Then yes, 30, maybe 31. My birthday was, I don't remember. 30 years old. This creature who looked 80, who looked like death hadn't quite finished with him yet, who weighed less than a child. Where are you from? Warsaw, the ghetto, then Auschwitz, then Buchenwald, then here. Each location delivered in a monotone, a list, a catalog of hell, places where humanity went to die. Steele called over his shoulder. Captain, water, food, medical attention now. 2 soldiers ran forward with canteens. Levin drank carefully small sips as if he'd forgotten how, as if his body no longer remembered what to do with sustenance. Steele kept one hand on his shoulder, anchoring him to reality, to this moment, to survival. How long have you been here? Steele asked. This camp 3 months, maybe 4. Before that, Levin's eyes drifted away. Does it matter? Long time? Very long time. Yes, Steele said, and meant it with everything in him. It matters. Everything matters. You matter. Levin looked at him then, really looked, and something like hope flickered behind the exhaustion, behind the resignation, behind the acceptance of death that had settled into his bone. They told us no one was coming, Levin said. The guards, they said the Americans didn't care about Jews, didn't care about prisoners, would leave us to rot, let us die. They said you'd never come this far. They lied. Yes, a ghost of a smile, barely there. I see that now. I see your stars, your tanks, your soldiers. Real, not a dream. More survivors emerged from the barracks, shuffling, supporting each other, moving like ancient men, though most were young, none of them celebrating. They were too weak for celebration, too damaged by survival, too close to death to believe in life yet. They just touched the white stars painted on American vehicles, reached out with skeletal fingers and touched metal, needed physical proof that salvation was real, that this wasn't another cruel dream, another delusion born of starvation and despair. Steele watched them come, counted them with a general's instinct. 60, 70 survivors. When this camp had held hundreds, where were the rest? Levin followed his gaze, understood the unspoken question. Dead, he said simply, machine-gunned when the SS realized you were coming. The ones too sick to march. They're the ones who couldn't stand. Murdered them all in the last 36 hours. Tried to burn the buildings, didn't finish. You came too fast. The words were matter of fact, no emotion left, just information delivered by a man who'd become very good at surviving, who'd learned to disconnect, to observe, to report without feeling. Show me, Steele said. General, you don't want to. Show me everything, every building, every room, every corner of this place. I need to see it all. David Levin nodded slowly. And so the mathematics teacher from Warsaw, who'd once loved numbers and logic and the beautiful certainty of equations, who weighed 68 pounds and had survived 3 concentration camps, became a guide through hell. The torture shed stood apart from the other buildings, smaller, more isolated, deliberately placed where screams wouldn't carry as far. Inside, Steele found the whipping block, blood-stained wood, worn smooth by use. By how many backs, how many bodies behind it, meat hooks hanging from the ceiling. Industrial, strong, designed to bear weight, for what he didn't want to imagine. But Levin told him anyway. They hung men there, Levin said, his voice empty of inflection, hollow. By their arms, behind their backs, until the shoulders dislocated, sometimes for hours, sometimes until they died. Depends on the guard's mood. Depends on if they had other things to do. Why? The question escaped before Steele could stop it, though he knew there was no answer. No reason. No logic that would make this comprehensible. Levin looked at him. Because they could. Because they were bored. Because a man looked at a guard wrong. Because someone didn't move fast enough. Because it was Tuesday. He paused. There doesn't need to be a reason. That's what you learn here. Evil doesn't need justification. It just needs opportunity. Steele stood silent, his hands curled into fists. The riding crop he'd retrieved hung forgotten at his belt. For once, the theatrical prop felt obscene, meaningless. What good was a riding crop here? What good were symbols of authority in the face of this? They moved deeper into the compound, past the ovens where bodies were incinerated, still warm, still smelling of burnt flesh and hair, past the gallows where men were hanged for entertainment, for the amusement of guards who'd grown bored with shooting, past the medical experimentation block where doctors without souls practiced their craft. Each new horror layered onto the previous one, building a weight that Steele had never felt before, pressing down on his chest, making it hard to breathe, making it hard to think. He'd fought across North Africa against Rommel's Africa Corps, watched the desert swallow men whole, seen soldiers die of thirst with water just miles away. He'd waded through the blood at Omaha Beach, literally waded. The water had been red, deep red, thick with it. He'd seen German cities reduced to rubble by strategic bombing, women and children buried under tons of concrete. War, terrible, brutal, necessary. But this was something else. This was murder made into policy. Death as an industrial process, the complete negation of everything he'd thought he was fighting for, everything he'd believed about civilization, about humanity, about the limits of what people could do to each other. How, Steele asked finally, how do you do this? How does a nation do this? How do ordinary men become capable of this? Levin considered the question, really considered it, like the teacher he'd once been. One small choice at a time, he said finally. The first time maybe someone protests, but there are consequences for protesting. So the second time people are quiet, they look at their shoes. And the third time they look away entirely. And the fourth time they don't even notice anymore. It becomes normal, just part of how things are. He pointed with a skeletal finger toward the distant town of Ohrdruf, 2 miles away, clearly visible from the camp. Clean, orderly, flowers blooming in window boxes, church steeple rising into the blue April sky. They knew, Levin said, the townspeople. They had to know. The smell reaches everywhere. The smoke from the crematorium, the sounds at night, the screaming. They knew. Did they come here, see it? No, they looked away. It was easier. Levin's voice carried no anger, just exhaustion, just the flat acceptance of someone who'd learned that this was how the world worked. That's what people do. They look away. They choose comfort over truth, safety over courage. They tell themselves it's not their problem, not their responsibility. Someone else will do something. Someone else will stop it. He paused. But no one does. No one stops it, because everyone is waiting for someone else. Steele stared at the town. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the sun made everything look pastoral, peaceful, like a scene from a fairy tale. Children probably played in those streets. Housewives probably hung laundry. Men probably worked in shops and offices and went home to dinner with their families. 2 miles from here, 2 miles from hell, and claimed they didn't know. And something inside Marcus Steele shifted, changed, crystallized into something harder and colder and infinitely more dangerous than anything the German army had faced. At 2:30, a military police officer arrived to take Steele's orders. The general stood at the edge of the camp, his eyes fixed on Ohrdruf. His immaculate uniform was now dusty. His famous riding crop hung loose in his hand. His face showed nothing. No emotion. No weakness. The mask of command firmly back in place. But inside a fire burned. "Captain," Steele said, his voice perfectly level. Controlled. Cold. "Yes, sir. Send men into that town, find the mayor, his wife, every person of authority, town council members, bankers, doctors, teachers, business owners, everyone who held power here, everyone who knew, Everyone who looked away. The captain wrote quickly. Yes, sir. What should I tell them? Tell them to report here tomorrow morning. 8 o'clock sharp, not a request, an order. And if they refuse, sir, Steele's hand moved to the ivory-handled pistol at his hip. Not drawing it, just resting there, a gesture that communicated everything without words, the elephant ivory catching the afternoon light. They won't refuse, Captain. Understood, sir. May I ask the purpose? Steele finally turned to look at him. The captain flinched. Whatever he saw in the general's eyes made him take an involuntary step backward, made him understand that something fundamental had changed in his commanding officer. They're going to take a tour, Steele said softly, each word precise, deliberate. A very thorough tour of everything here. Every building, every room, every pile of bodies, every torture device, every oven, every single piece of evidence. Sir, the townspeople claim they didn't know about. Of course they claim that. Steele's voice was venomous. Pure poison. The smell from this place covers the entire county. The smoke from the crematorium was visible for miles. You can see this camp from their church steeple. They walked past here every day. Smelled it. Saw it. Heard it. They knew. They chose not to see. He pointed his riding crop at the camp, then at the town. The gesture encompassed both. The crop felt right again. Not theatrical, not symbolic, but practical. A pointer, an instrument of judgment. Tomorrow morning, ignorance stops being an option. Tomorrow morning, every one of them walks through this gate, and they don't leave until they've seen everything, until they've looked at everybody, until they've stood in every room where men died. Understand? Yes, sir. Use trucks if necessary, use bayonets if necessary, use whatever force is required. But tomorrow morning, Captain, every person of authority in that town will stand exactly where I'm standing right now, and they will see what they pretended not to know. The captain saluted and left, almost running, glad to be away from whatever had transformed his general into this cold instrument of reckoning. Steele remained standing at the camp's edge, watching the town, planning tomorrow's operation with the methodical precision he normally reserved for military campaigns. Assault routes, timing, resources, contingencies. Behind him, medical personnel worked to save the survivors. Soldiers distributed food and water carefully, knowing too much too fast would kill men whose stomachs had forgotten how to process nourishment. David Levin sat on the ground nearby, wrapped in an American Army blanket, sipping water from a canteen. Still alive, still bearing witness. The sun moved across the sky. The spring day remained beautiful. Birds sang into the trees. The world continued turning as if nothing had happened. But everything had happened, and General Sir Marcus Steele stood silent, making calculations, planning justice, preparing to do something unprecedented in military history. He would make them see, not with bullets, not with bombs, not with any traditional weapon of war. He would use their own eyes, force them to witness, strip away every excuse and every lie and every comfortable fiction they'd built to protect themselves from truth. Tomorrow morning, the people of Ohrdruf would walk through hell, and Marcus Steele would be their guide. That evening, alone in his tent, Steele opened his personal diary, the leather-bound book he'd carried through 3 years of war, pages filled with observations, reflections, doubts. He showed no one. The private thoughts of a man who wore authority like armor, but questioned everything in the dark. He wrote 3 lines in handwriting that shook with barely contained fury. They looked away. So I will make them see. God forgive me, I will make them all see. He closed the book, set it aside, stared at it for a long moment. Outside his tent, guards changed shifts. Trucks rumbled past carrying supplies. The machinery of war continued its relentless momentum. Soldiers talked and laughed. Someone played a harmonica. You are my sunshine. Incongruous. Perfect. But inside, Marcus Steele sat in silence. A 60-year-old general who thought he understood war, who thought he'd seen everything, who'd spent 37 years studying violence and death and the 1,000 ways men could kill each other, who now realized he'd seen nothing at all. The real war hadn't been fought with tanks and artillery. It had been fought in camps like this, in silence, in complicity, in the small choices people made to look away rather than speak up, in the daily decisions to choose comfort over conscience, safety over courage, convenience over truth. And tomorrow, Marcus Steele would fight a different kind of battle, not for territory, not for strategic advantage, not for the glory and honor and recognition that came with traditional victory, for something far more important, for the souls of people who'd lost them one small compromise at a time. He checked his watch, his father's watch, 8:30 in the evening, 11 and a half hours until the townspeople arrived. 11 and a half hours to prepare. Steele stood, straightened his uniform, picked up his riding crop, felt the weight of it, the balance, touched the ivory pistols at his hips, cold, solid, real, and stepped out into the April evening to plan the most important operation of his entire military career, the forced witnessing of hell. Tomorrow he would make them see what they'd chosen to ignore. Tomorrow he would destroy their ability to deny. Tomorrow he would ensure that no one, not now, not 50 years from now, not ever, could claim the German people didn't know. Because he would make damn sure they saw every single thing. At the torture shed, the woman who'd fainted earlier vomited violently, her expensive dress now stained, her dignity gone. She heaved until there was nothing left. Dry heaves, her body rejecting not just breakfast, but the very reality of what she was seeing. Steele waited, arms crossed, the riding crop tapping against his leg, patient, merciless. Let her finish, then ordered her to continue. "I can't," she whispered, her voice broken. "Please, I can't see anymore." "You will. Please." "Where was your mercy when this was happening?" Steele's voice was ice. "Where was your compassion? You lived 2 miles away and did nothing. You heard the screams and closed your windows. You saw the smoke and looked away. You smelled death every morning and went about your day. Now you see what your silence enabled, what your comfort purchased." She stumbled forward, through the door, into the room with the whipping block and the hooks and the blood on the walls. The blood that had been there so long it had turned black. Permanent stains, evidence that couldn't be erased. Her legs gave out. She collapsed to her knees, sobbing, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. Steele felt nothing. No sympathy, no satisfaction, just cold purpose. Just the certainty that this had to happen, that she had to see, that they all had to see. The mayor and his wife stood together, holding hands, both crying now, both unable to look away from the meat hooks, calculating, understanding, imagining bodies hanging there, men screaming, guards laughing. Their knuckles were white, gripping each other, the only anchor in a world that had suddenly revealed itself to be something else entirely. "They hung people here," Steele said, addressing the crowd, his riding crop pointed at each element as he described it, making them follow, making them see. Not for information, not for military reasons, for fun, because they were bored, because a man moved too slowly, because someone looked at a guard wrong, because it was the entertainment. He walked to the whipping block, put his hand on it. The riding crop touched the blood-stained wood, traced the worn surface, the smooth areas where countless backs had been beaten. "A survivor told me yesterday that men were beaten here until they died. Sometimes it took hours. The guards would take breaks, have lunch, smoke cigarettes, come back and continue beating. Like it was work, like they were building a wall or digging a ditch. Just routine, just another day." He swept his arm to encompass the entire civilian group. The riding crop traced an arc through the air. "And all of you heard nothing, smelled nothing, saw nothing for months while you went to church, while you sent your children to school, while you opened your shops and lived your lives. Silence except for quiet sobbing, except for the sound of breathing. Ragged, broken. You knew," Steele said. "Each word a nail, each syllable a judgment. And you did nothing. And that makes you complicit. That makes you guilty, not of murder, not directly, but of something worse. Of knowing and choosing not to see. Of understanding and choosing not to act. Of hearing screams and choosing silence." An older man in the back spoke up, voice shaking. "What could we have done? The SS would have killed us, would have put us in here too. We were powerless." Steele turned to look at him, studied him. "Were you all 60 of you, all 1,000 people in your town, all the towns around here? Were you all powerless or were you comfortable? Was it powerlessness or was it the fear of losing what you had, your homes, your businesses, your comfortable lives?" The man said nothing. "I'm not saying you should have stormed this camp with pitchforks, dog," Steele continued, "but you could have spoken up, could have protested, could have refused to cooperate, could have documented what was happening, could have told someone, anyone, the church, the Red Cross, underground resistance, something, anything, but you did nothing, because doing nothing was easier, safer, more comfortable. He paused. Let that sink in. And now you stand here and claim powerlessness. Now you claim ignorance. Now you claim innocence. But innocence died the first time you smelled this place and said nothing. The first time you heard screams and closed your windows. The first time you saw smoke and looked away. The tour took 2 hours. 2 hours of horror, 2 hours of forced witnessing, 2 hours of watching comfortable lies disintegrate under the weight of truth, 2 hours of watching people's worlds collapse. They were shown everything. The ovens, the gallows, the medical experimentation block, the storage room where human hair was kept, sorted by color, labeled, inventory, the room where gold teeth were collected, weighed, cataloged, the room where personal effects were stored, shoes, glasses, photographs, thousands of them. Lives reduced to objects. By the end, the civilians were no longer the well-dressed, dignified people who'd stepped off the trucks. They were broken, shattered, their Sunday clothes covered in dust from the camp, the smell clinging to their skin, to their hair, to everything. A smell they'd never be able to forget, never be able to wash away. Some still wept, some had gone silent and blank. Their minds simply unable to process anymore. Gone somewhere else, someplace safe, someplace where this wasn't real. All of them had been fundamentally changed. As they loaded back onto the trucks, Steele stood watching. His face showed nothing, the general's mask firmly in place. But inside something felt not satisfied, not vindicated, not triumphant, complete. He'd done what he set out to do, forced them to see, made them witness, destroyed their ability to claim ignorance. Mayor Weber was the last to board. He paused at the truck, looked back at Steele. His face was streaked with tears and dust. His expensive coat looked cheap now, his dignity gone. I didn't know, he said. One last desperate attempt at denial, one last grasp at innocence. Steele met his eyes, held them, let the moment stretch. You're still lying, even now after everything. You're still lying. His voice was soft, almost sad. To me or to yourself? Weber's face crumpled, collapsed like a building imploding. He climbed onto the truck without another word, sat down heavily, stared at nothing. The vehicles drove away, carrying their cargo of shattered souls back to a town that would never be the same, back to homes that would feel different, back to lives that had been irrevocably changed. Steele remained at the camp entrance, alone, the riding crop still in his hand, the ivory pistols still on his hips, the symbols of authority that had just changed history. He'd done it, forced them to see, made them witness, ensured that no one, not now, not 50 years from now, not ever could claim the German people didn't know. But as he stood there in the April sunshine, he felt no triumph, no victory, no sense of righteousness vindicated, just the weight of necessary cruelty, the burden of being the instrument of accountability, the knowledge that he'd caused suffering, psychological suffering, but suffering nonetheless, and would have to live with that choice. Behind him, a jeep approached, the sound of tires on gravel, the familiar rumble of a military vehicle. Nathaniel Garrett stepped out. "It's done?" the Supreme Commander asked. "Yes, sir." How did they react? As expected. Shock, horror, denial at first, then acceptance. Or something like acceptance. Steele paused. Guilt. I saw guilt in their faces. Whether they'll carry it or bury it, I don't know, but for now, they felt it. Garrett nodded slowly. Good, because this is only the beginning. Sir, I'm ordering documentation of this entire camp. Photographers, film crews, reporters from every major newspaper and wire service. Life magazine, Time, the New York Times, everyone. Everything recorded, everything preserved, everything made public. Steele felt something lift slightly in his chest, a weight redistributed, shared. Sir, I own. Because someday, Garrett said, his voice hard as steel, someday some son of a bitch is going to claim this never happened. Going to say these camps are propaganda. These photographs are staged. These testimonies are coached. And when that day comes, and it will come, Marcus, believe me, it will come, I want evidence. Undeniable. Irrefutable. Mountains of evidence that no reasonable person can dismiss. Yes, sir. I want photographers documenting every building, every room, every body, film crews recording survivor testimony, reporters interviewing everyone, soldiers, survivors, medical personnel, everyone who saw this. I want documentation so thorough that denial becomes impossible. Garrett walked closer, put a hand on Steele's shoulder. What you did today, forcing those civilians to witness, that's part of it. That's evidence too. Evidence that the local population knew. Evidence that we didn't let them pretend otherwise. That matters. That's historical record now. Yes, sir. And Marcus, every available soldier in this region is going to walk through this camp, just like you suggested. Thousands of them starting tomorrow. They need to see why we fight. They need to understand what we're up against, what we've stopped, what we've ended. When do we start? Tomorrow morning. First groups arrive at 0800 hours. I've already issued orders. Every unit within 50 miles. They'll come in waves, hundreds per day, thousands per week, until every American soldier in this theater has seen Ordruff. Garrett turned to leave, stopped, looked back, his face showing something Steele had never seen before. Not weakness, not exactly, but humanity, vulnerability, the mask slipping slightly. Marcus, what you saw this morning, what we all saw, it changes a man. I know that. I feel it in myself. Something fundamental has shifted. The world isn't what we thought it was. Humanity isn't what we thought it was. Evil is worse than we imagined. Yes, sir. Don't let it destroy you. Don't let it make you bitter. Don't let it convince you that darkness is all there is. He gestured back toward the camp. Because there's light too. Those survivors who chose to live, who fought to survive, who bore witness. David Levin, Isaac, all of them. That's light. That's the other side of humanity. The choice to persist, to hope, to believe life is worth living even after this. I'll try to remember that, sir. Do more than try. Make it a discipline, because we're going to need good men after this war. Men who've seen the worst and still believe in the best. Men who understand evil but choose good anyway. Can you do that? Steele considered. Honest consideration. Could he, would he? After what he'd seen, after what he'd done. I don't know, sir, but I'll try mine. That's all any of us can do. Garrett climbed into his Jeep. The driver started the engine. But before driving away, Garrett called out one more thing. The world needs to know, Marcus, not just about the camps, about what you did today, about forcing those civilians to witness. Some will criticize you. Call it cruel, call it vindictive. Let them. History will understand. History will judge you right. I guarantee it. The Jeep drove away. Steele stood alone. The camp silent behind him. The town of Ordruff silent in the distance. And somewhere between them, in the space of those 2 miles, accountability had been served. Not with bullets, not with bombs, not with trials or executions or any traditional form of justice. With witnessing, with forced truth, with the simple, terrible act of making people see what they'd chosen to ignore. That evening, Steele walked through the camp one more time. Alone, no aides, no soldiers, just himself and the ghosts. The bodies had been documented, photographed from every angle. Measurements taken, everything recorded. Tomorrow they'd be buried, properly, with dignity, with ceremony, with the respect they'd been denied in life. The survivors were gone, moved to field hospitals. Real beds, real medicine, real hope of survival. David Levin, Isaac, all of them, getting the care they needed, the care they'd been denied for so long. But the camp remained, would remain for a while longer, for documentation, for the thousands of soldiers who'd walk through in the coming weeks, for history. Steele stood in the torture shed, the last light of day slanting through gaps in the walls, the same beautiful light that had illuminated horror this morning. Light was neutral. It showed everything, good and evil, beauty and horror, truth. He thought about the civilians he'd forced through here, their faces, their reactions. The moment when denial shattered and truth broke through. Had he been right to do it? Had forcing them to witness been justice or cruelty? Or both? He didn't know, might never know. But it had felt necessary, essential. The only possible response to their decades of looking away. They'd had a choice, every day for months, years. Look or look away, speak or stay silent, act or do nothing. They'd chosen wrong, and now they'd paid a price, not with their lives, not with their freedom, but with their innocence, with their comfortable lies, with their ability to pretend they were good people who'd done nothing wrong. Was that justice Steele didn't know? But it was something. It was accountability. It was truth. It was refusing to let evil hide behind we didn't know. He touched the whipping block one more time, felt the smooth wood, the bloodstains, the evidence of suffering that couldn't be erased. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "To no one. To everyone. To the men who'd died here. To the men who'd watched. To himself. I'm sorry I didn't come sooner. I'm sorry we didn't know. I'm sorry we didn't stop this." The shed remained silent. No absolution, no forgiveness, just silence and gathering darkness. Steele walked out, back to his tent, back to the work of war. Tomorrow, thousands of soldiers would begin arriving. The machinery of witnessing would begin in earnest. The documentation would continue. The evidence would mount. And somewhere in a town 2 miles away, 60 civilians sat in their homes trying to process what they'd seen, trying to reconcile the comfortable life they'd known with the horror that had existed just beyond their vision. Some would deny it even now, would convince themselves it wasn't as bad as it seemed, would rationalize, would explain, would rebuild the walls of denial. But some, maybe just a few, but some would change, would understand, would carry the weight, would remember. And that had to be enough. It had to be, because Steele had nothing else to give. April 10th, 1945. 5 days after the forced march. 5 days of soldiers walking through Ordruff. Hundreds per day. Thousands total. Each one confronted with why they fought, what they fought against, what they'd stopped. Steele stood at the camp entrance and watched them come and go. Young faces aging in real time as they witnessed. Boys becoming men in the space between entering the camp and leaving it. Innocence dying, understanding born. One young corporal, Elias Whitmore, 19 years old from Kansas, stopped to talk with Steele after his tour. The kid carried a camera, Kodak, personal property, had taken dozens of photographs during the tour, more than the official photographers. Every angle, every detail, every piece of evidence. His hand still shook as he approached. "Sir, I need to tell you something." "Go ahead, Corporal." "Before today, I thought this war was about politics, about land and power and stuff I didn't really understand. Hitler wanting to conquer Europe, Germany being aggressive, strategic interest." Whitmore's voice shook. "But I get it now. We're not fighting for territory. We're fighting to stop this, to make sure this never happens again, to save people from this." "That's right, son. I took pictures, sir. More than 100 with my camera. I'm going to show my family, my kids someday, my grandkids. So they'll know, so they'll remember, so no one can ever say this didn't happen." Steele put a hand on the young man's shoulder, felt the weight of passing the torch, of creating the next generation of witnesses, of ensuring memory would survive beyond his lifetime. "That's important work, Corporal. Bearing witness, keeping the record, documenting truth. Don't ever think it's not important." "Sir, can I ask you something?" "Yes." "How do you live with it? With knowing this happened, with having seen it? I've been here 2 hours and I feel, I don't know, broken, changed, different. How do you carry this?" Steele looked at the young soldier, saw his own younger self, full of questions, searching for answers, trying to understand a world that had suddenly revealed itself to be darker than imagined. "You carry it," Steele said finally. "You don't forget. You don't minimize. You don't pretend it wasn't as bad as it was. You carry the weight and you let it change you. But you don't let it destroy you. You don't let it convince you that darkness is all there is." "How?" "You look for light. You find the survivors who chose to live, who fought to survive, who bore witness even when silence would have been easier. You find the people who helped, who hid Jews, who resisted, who chose courage when comfort was available. They exist too. Not many, but some. And you use that. Use it to believe that humanity is capable of good even after you've seen the worst. And you use this," Steele continued. "Use what you've seen to be better, to do better, to make sure you never look away when evil happens, to make sure you're the one who speaks up, who acts, who refuses to stay silent even when silence is easier." Whitmore nodded slowly, processing, understanding, becoming someone different from who he'd been this morning. "I won't forget, sir. I'll show these pictures. Tell this story. Make sure people know. Good, that's your duty now, your mission. More important than any combat mission you'll ever have. Because combat wins wars, but memory prevents them." Whitmore saluted, walked away, a different man than the one who'd arrived 3 hours ago. And Steele realized something. This was his mission now, not advancing armies, not winning battles, not the tactics and strategies he'd studied his whole life. but ensuring memory, bearing witness, creating a record that couldn't be erased or denied or minimized. This was the war that mattered. The war against forgetting. The war for truth. The war to ensure that 50 years from now, 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now, people would know what happened here, would know that evil existed, that ordinary people enabled it through small choices, that looking away had consequences, that silence was complicity and would choose differently. That was the hope anyway, the belief that memory could prevent repetition, that documentation could stop denial, that truth could triumph over lies. It had to be true. Because if it wasn't, then what was the point of any of this? April 12, 1945. President Roosevelt died. The news came through on the radio. Stroke. Warm Springs, Georgia. Dead at 63. The war continued. It had to. But something felt different. Like a pillar had been removed. Like the architecture of the world had shifted slightly. That evening, Garrett visited Steele again. Brought bourbon. Good bourbon. Not the military issue stuff. Real Kentucky bourbon. 18 years old, smooth, expensive. They sat in Steele's tent. Two generals, two friends, two men trying to process what they'd seen and what it meant. How are you holding up, Marcus? Steele considered lying, decided against it. Garrett deserved better. Had earned honesty through decades of shared service. Honestly, Nate, I don't know. The Weber suicide. The news had come through days ago. Heinrich Weber and his wife. Dead. Wrists slit. Note left behind. 6 words, we cannot live with this shame. That's part of it, but not all. Steele poured himself another finger of bourbon. I keep thinking about what I did, forcing those people to see. Was it justice or was it just rage, revenge, cruelty dressed up as accountability? Garrett leaned back, considered his words carefully. Does it matter? It matters to me. Why? Because if I did it for justice, for history, for the right reasons, then I can live with the consequences. Weber's death, the trauma to those civilians, all of it. But if I did it because I was angry, because I wanted them to suffer, because I wanted revenge, then I'm not sure I'm any better than... He stopped, couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't say the words. Then what? Then them? Garrett's voice was gentle. Marcus, you're nothing like them. You saw evil and confronted it. They saw evil and enabled it. That's not the same thing, not even close. But I forced them, used military power to compel civilians, caused psychological trauma that led directly to 2 deaths. How is that different from... Because your goal was to expose truth, not hide it. To create accountability, not escape it. To make sure this never happens again, not to perpetuate it. Garrett leaned forward. You're questioning yourself because you're a good man. Bad men don't second-guess their actions. Bad men sleep soundly. You're losing sleep because you have a conscience. That's the difference. Steele smiled without humor. That's convenient philosophy. It's also true. They sat in silence, the bourbon bottle slowly emptying. Outside, soldiers worked, the machinery of war grinding forward, always forward, toward Berlin, toward victory, toward the end. Did I do the right thing? Steele asked finally, the question he'd been avoiding, the question that haunted him. Yes. You sound certain. I am certain. And 50 years from now, when historians look back at this moment, they'll understand why. You didn't just liberate a camp. You created a record. You forced witnesses. You made it impossible for future generations to deny. That matters. That changes everything. And the Webers made their own choices. You didn't kill them. Their guilt did. Their inability to live with what they'd enabled. You can't carry their guilt on top of your own doubts. You'll break under that weight. But Steele heard the words without fully believing them, because in his heart, in the place he didn't let anyone see, he wondered if forcing people to witness horror made him complicit in a different kind of cruelty. Not the cruelty of murder, not the cruelty of torture, but the cruelty of psychological devastation, of destroying someone's ability to live with themselves, of making reality so unbearable that death seemed preferable. Was that better? Was that justice? He didn't know. What you did, Garrett said quietly, was necessary, not good, not evil, just necessary. Sometimes that's all we can be. Men who do what's necessary even when we're not sure if it's right. That's not very comforting. No, but it's honest. And right now, I think you need honesty more than comfort. Steele nodded, appreciated that. Garrett understanding what he needed, what he could handle, what would actually help versus what would just be platitudes. The documentation is going well, Garrett continued. Thousands of photographs, hours of film, Dozens of written testimonies, mountains of evidence. When we're done, denial will be impossible. That's your legacy. That's what you'll be remembered for. Not the battles, not the tactical victories. This, making sure the world knows, making sure the world sees. Is that enough? It has to be, because it's all we have. And they finished the bourbon, sat in companionable silence. Two men who'd seen too much trying to figure out how to live with it. Finally, Garrett stood, put his hand on Steele's shoulder, a gesture of friendship, of respect, of understanding. Get some sleep, Marcus. Tomorrow more soldiers arrive. More witnessing. More documentation. The work continues. Yes, sir. Garrett left, and Steele sat alone in his tent with the empty bourbon bottle and the weight of his choices and the knowledge that he'd done something that couldn't be undone. He'd forced people to see, and two of them had died rather than live with what they'd seen, and he'd have to carry that for the rest of his life. Whether it was right or wrong, whether it was justice or cruelty, whether it was necessary or inexcusable, he'd carry it, because that's what soldiers did. They carried the weight of their choices, the consequences of their orders, the blood on their hands, whether literal or figurative. And Marcus Steele would carry this until the day he died. April 6, 1945, 7 o'clock in the morning. The military police jeep arrived at headquarters carrying news that would echo through history. The young lieutenant's face was pale, not the healthy pale of indoor work or winter, the pale of shock, of horror, of witnessing something that fundamentally changed how you saw the world. His hands gripped the steering wheel even after the engine died, like he needed something solid to hold on to, something real, something that made sense when nothing else did. Steele looked up from his morning coffee, black, bitter, strong enough to strip paint. He hadn't slept well. Dreams of meat hooks and empty eyes, dreams of civilians walking through hell, dreams of David Levin's skeletal hand reaching for his boots. He'd woken at 4, given up on sleep at 4:30, been working since 5. Report, Lieutenant. Sir, it's the mayor, Heinrich Weber, and his wife, Frau Weber. We found them this morning. Something in the lieutenant's voice made Steele set down his cup. Stand, walk closer, the general's instinct. Something was wrong, something beyond the normal wrong of occupied Germany. Found them where? Their home, sir. The housekeeper arrived at 6:30 to prepare breakfast. She couldn't get them to answer the door. Called us. We broke it down and... The lieutenant stopped, swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. And what, Lieutenant? They're dead, sir. Both of them, suicide. Slit their wrists sometime during the night. Judging by the blood pattern, probably around midnight. Maybe later. The bodies were cold. Been dead for hours. Steele felt nothing. No shock. No surprise. Just a strange hollowness expanding in his chest, like a cavity opening up. Empty space where something should be but wasn't. Was there a note? Yes, sir. The lieutenant handed over a piece of paper, cream-colored, expensive stationery, watermarked, the kind wealthy people used for correspondence, for thank-you notes and dinner invitations and important letters. The handwriting was shaky, written by someone whose hands trembled, someone in extremis, someone writing their last words and knowing it. But the words were clear enough, in German, perfect grammar, proper punctuation. Even in death-maintaining form, a soldier had already translated it, written the English below the German in pencil. Neat block letters. Wir können mit dieser Schande nicht leben. We cannot live with this shame. 6 words. That was all. 6 words to explain why 2 people chose death over memory. Why ending existence seemed preferable to carrying knowledge. Why the weight of what they'd seen crushed them completely. Steele stared at the note for a long time. The paper felt heavy, heavier than paper should feel. Like it carried the weight of 2 souls, 2 lives, 2 deaths that were somehow his responsibility. Sir, the lieutenant prompted, what should we do about the bodies? The investigation, should we notify? Arrange burial, document everything, photograph the scene, take statements from the housekeeper and any neighbors who might have heard or seen anything, write a full report. Steele's voice came out flat, professional, the voice of command overriding whatever he actually felt. Mark it as suicide, no further investigation needed. Yes, sir. Should we inform the townspeople? They'll know soon enough. Word spreads. Small town. Everyone knows everyone else's business. And the other civilians, the ones who toured the camp yesterday, should we monitor them in case? In case what, Lieutenant? In case they choose the same path, Steele folded the note carefully, precisely, creased it along the existing folds. We can't stop them. We can't force them to live any more than we could force them to see. Actually, we did force them to see. We just can't force them to live with it. The lieutenant nodded, uncertain, uncomfortable. Dismissed. The lieutenant saluted and left, grateful to escape, grateful to be away from whatever was happening in his commanding officer's eyes. Steele remained standing, holding the note, reading it again and again. We cannot live with this shame. He'd wanted them to live with it. That was the entire point, to force them to carry the weight of what they'd enabled, to make them remember every day for the rest of their lives, to ensure that every morning when they woke up, they'd think about what happened 2 miles from their home while they slept. That was justice. That was accountability. That was the price of looking away. But Weber had chosen the coward's way out. Escape through death, absolution through absence, silence through non-existence. And Marcus Steele felt, what satisfaction, number victory, number relief, no. He felt cheated, robbed of the justice he'd been trying to serve. Because death was easy, death was simple, death was final. No more carrying, no more remembering, no more waking up every morning and thinking about those bodies, those hooks, those ovens, just nothing, just darkness, just the end. And somehow that felt like Weber had won, had escaped the sentence Steele had been trying to impose, had found a loophole in accountability. Or maybe the weight had been exactly what Steele intended. Maybe it had worked perfectly, been so heavy, so unbearable, so crushing that death seemed like the only option, which meant Steele had succeeded, which meant 2 people were dead because he'd forced them to see truth, which meant he'd killed them, not directly, not with his hands, not with his pistols, but killed them nonetheless. That thought sat in his chest like a stone. An hour later at the morning briefing, Steele delivered the news to his staff. His voice remained steady, emotionless. A general reporting facts, clinical, professional, distant. Mayor Weber and his wife committed suicide last night, unable to cope with what they witnessed yesterday. Their deaths changed nothing about our operations here. We continue as planned. Next group of soldiers arrives at 0900 hours. Documentation continues. Everything proceeds on schedule. One of his aides, Captain Morris Good officer, Princeton graduate, spoke up. Sir, should we perhaps reconsider the mass tours if the psychological impact is causing suicides? No, the word came out sharp, hard, like a gunshot. The tours continue. Every soldier in this region will see this camp. That order stands. Understood. Yes, sir, but if civilians are dying, the Webers made a choice. They chose silence when speaking up might have stopped this. They chose comfort when courage was needed. They chose to look away when witnessing was required. And yesterday, after finally being forced to see, they chose death over living with the consequences of all those previous choices. Steele paused, let that sink in, made sure everyone understood. I have exactly zero sympathy for them. The staff shifted uncomfortably. This was new, this coldness, this absolute mercilessness. They'd seen Steele angry before, seen him furious at incompetence or cowardice, but never this ice-cold absence of humanity. Captain Morris tried again. Sir, with respect, doesn't their suicide indicate that perhaps the forced witnessing was excessive, that we pushed too hard? Excessive. Steele's voice was dangerous now, quiet, the kind of quiet that preceded explosions. Excessive compared to what, Captain? Compared to the men hung on meat hooks for hours, compared to the prisoners beaten to death for entertainment, compared to the systematic murder of thousands. What exactly is excessive in comparison to that? I didn't mean. The Webers lived 2 miles from a death camp for months. They smelled it every day, saw the smoke, heard the screams, and did nothing. They went to church, ate dinner, slept peacefully, while men died screaming. And you think making them witness what they enabled is excessive? Silence around the table. Dismissed, Steele said. They filed out, quickly, quietly, grateful to escape, all except General Theodore Brennan, who lingered by the door, waiting, patient, understanding that his friend needed time, space, but also needed someone. When the room emptied, Brennan closed the door, sat down without being invited, looked at Steele with the kind of directness that only decades of shared experience allowed. 2 men who'd been through North Africa together. Sicily, Normandy. Two men who'd seen each other at their best and worst, who'd shared tents and rations and the burden of sending men to die, who trusted each other enough for honesty. You want to talk about it? Nothing to talk about. Marcus? Just his name. But it carried weight, carried the implication that pretending was pointless, that denial was useless, that honesty was required. Steele's jaw clenched. He walked to the window, stared out at the camp, at the crews already setting up for today's tours, at the photographers documenting everything, at the machinery of remembrance grinding forward. Relentless, unstoppable. I wanted them to live with it, he said finally, quietly. That was the whole goddamn point, Ted. To force them to carry it, to remember, to wake up every morning and know what they'd allowed to happen, to spend the rest of their lives carrying that weight. And instead they took the easy way out. 6 words on fancy paper and they're done. No more consequences, no more guilt, no more waking up at 3 in the morning seeing those bodies. Just nothing. Gone. Escaped. Brennan stood, walked to stand beside him at the window. 2 silhouettes against the morning light. They killed themselves, Marcus. That's not nothing. That's not escape. That's the ultimate consequence. Is it, or is it just avoiding everything else, avoiding the years of carrying, avoiding the daily reminder, avoiding having to look their neighbors in the eye, avoiding everything I wanted them to feel? Does it matter? Steele turned to face him. I don't know. I made them see. I forced them to witness. I destroyed their ability to deny, and now they're dead. So what did I actually accomplish? Did I serve justice, or did I just kill 2 people? You didn't kill them. Didn't I? Would they be alive right now if I hadn't forced them through that camp? If I'd just let them claim ignorance? If I'd been merciful? Maybe. But then what? They continue living comfortable lives, continue pretending they didn't know, continue getting away with looking away while thousands died. At least they'd be alive. To what end? So they could perpetuate the lie, so future generations could say the German people didn't know. So this could happen again because no one was held accountable. Brennan put a hand on his friend's shoulder. You did what was necessary, what Garrett and I and every man in this army knows needed to be done. You destroyed their ability to deny. You created witnesses. You ensured accountability. The fact that they couldn't live with that truth, that's on them, not you. Is it? The question hung in the air, heavy, unanswerable. You're a good man questioning a hard choice, Brennan said. That's what good men do. Bad men don't second guess. Bad men sleep soundly. You're losing sleep because you have a conscience. Don't lose that. Don't let this make you hard. Steele nodded, but his eyes remained troubled, haunted. After Brennan left, Steele sat alone in the empty room, the Weber's note still on his desk, those 6 words staring up at him like an accusation. We cannot live with this shame. Maybe that was the point, he thought. Maybe shame that heavy was meant to be unbearable. Maybe that was its purpose. Maybe death was the appropriate response to complicity and genocide. But then again, maybe all he'd done was give 2 people an excuse to check out instead of making them do the harder work of living with what they'd done, of carrying it, of letting it change them, of spending their remaining years trying to atone. Dead people can't atone. Dead people can't bear witness. Dead people can't warn future generations. Dead people are just dead. And maybe that was the real failure. Not that he'd been too harsh, but that he hadn't anticipated this response, hadn't realized that some people would choose death over truth. He didn't know. And that uncertainty ate at him more than he wanted to admit. April 8th, 1945, the press conference. 50 reporters crowded into a requisitioned barn that served as a briefing room. War correspondents from every major publication, photographers, newsreel cameras. The world's media summoned by General Garrett to hear about Ohrdruf, to hear the truth, to document the evidence, to bear witness for the millions who couldn't be here. Marcus Steele stood at the front, uniform immaculate, every button polished, every crease perfect, posture ramrod straight, the ivory pistols gleaming on his hips, the riding crop held casually in his left hand, the very image of American military confidence. This was the public Steele, the general, the warrior, the man who never doubted, never questioned, never showed weakness, the mask firmly in place. Gentlemen, he began, his voice carrying authority that silenced the room instantly. What we discovered at Ohrdruf represents the true nature of the enemy we've been fighting. Not soldiers defending their homeland, Not warriors following orders in the fog of war, but murderers, systematic, methodical, industrial in scale. Hands shot up, questions shouted. Steele raised the riding crop slightly and the room quieted. Years of command, years of authority. Men obeyed without thinking. I made the decision to force local civilians to tour this camp, to witness what had happened less than 2 miles from their homes, to see what they'd chosen to ignore. This was not revenge. This was not cruelty. This was accountability. These people claimed ignorance. I made certain ignorance was no longer possible. General Steele, a reporter from the New York Times, aggressive, educated, the kind who thought he knew everything. Some are saying this forced witnessing constitutes collective punishment, that it violates protocols regarding civilian treatment. How do you respond? Punishment would have been executions, imprisonment, deportation. What I did was force people to see truth, to confront reality, to witness what their silence enabled. That's not punishment. That's education. That's accountability. That's ensuring the historical record is clear. But the mayor committed suicide after the mayor made his own choices. He chose silence for months while atrocities occurred within earshot of his bedroom window. He chose denial when confronted with evidence. He chose comfort over courage. And yes, he chose death when forced to confront what his silence enabled. Steele paused. Let that land. Let the reporters process. I don't control other people's choices. I only control my own. I chose to make them see. They chose how to respond to that seeing. Those are separate choices, separate responsibilities. The reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras clicked. Newsreel cameras whirred. This would be on every front page tomorrow. In every newsreel, in every radio broadcast, the world would know. That was the point. Garrett was right. Documentation, evidence, witnesses, mountains of proof that couldn't be denied. General, do you have any regrets about? No, next question. But 2 people are dead. Thousands are dead, tens of thousands, millions across Europe. The Weber's suicide is tragic, but it's a footnote, a small consequence of their own choices. My sympathy is reserved for the innocent, for the victims, for the men who hung on meat hooks while the Webers ate dinner, not for the people who enabled that suffering through their silence. This was the public Marcus Steele, confident, unapologetic, certain of his righteousness, showing no doubt, no weakness, no humanity. But it was a performance, and he knew it. Inside, he carried the weight, felt the doubt, questioned everything. But generals couldn't show that. Leaders couldn't admit uncertainty. The army needed confidence, needed certainty, needed to believe their commanders knew what they were doing. So Steele performed, played the role, wore the mask, and hated every second of it. That evening in the officers' mess, Steele sat with Brennan and 3 other generals. The kind of informal gathering where ranks blurred slightly and men spoke more freely. Jackets unbuttoned, ties loosened, whiskey poured. The rituals of men trying to process horror through alcohol and conversation. The conversation drifted inevitably to Ordruff. It dominated every discussion. Impossible to avoid. Like trying to ignore an elephant in the room, or a corpse, or 1,000 corpses. I still can't believe it, said a colonel who toured the camp that afternoon. Sanders, good officer, West Point class of 25. I've been in combat for 3 years, seen men die in every conceivable way. Artillery, gunfire, disease, burns, everything. But this? It's different, Steele said quietly, his voice lacking the confidence of the press conference. More honest, more human. Combat is soldiers against soldiers. Men choosing to fight, accepting risk. What happened here was murderous policy. Victims with no choice, no chance, no hope. Do you think the German people knew, really knew, or were they genuinely ignorant? Steele set down his whiskey, looked at the amber liquid catching lamplight, thought about his answer carefully. I think they knew enough, knew that their Jewish neighbors disappeared, knew about the camps, maybe not the full scope, maybe not every detail, but enough, and more importantly, they chose not to ask questions, chose comfort over curiosity, chose to believe convenient mussies rather than investigate inconvenient truths. Are we any different? The question came from Brennan. Everyone turned to look at him. What do you mean, Ted? I mean, how many times do we look away from inconvenient truths? How many times do we choose not to see what's right in front of us because acknowledging it would require us to act, require us to sacrifice comfort, require us to take risks? Silence around the table. Uncomfortable silence. I think, Steele said slowly, carefully, that's what haunts me most. Not what they did, but how easily they did it. How normal people became complicit through small choices, through daily decisions to prioritize comfort over conscience. And wondering, he stopped. Started again. Wondering if I would have been brave enough to resist. If I'd been born there, raised there, subject to that propaganda. Would I have been the one who spoke up, or the one who looked away? Would I have risked my family, my home, my life? Or would I have rationalized, convinced myself it wasn't my problem, that someone else would do something? The colonel shifted uncomfortably. That's not a fair question, sir. You're not them. You're American. Raised with different values. Are we really that different? We like to think we are. Americans are different, better, more moral. But we're all just people, subject to the same fears and pressures and rationalizations. The Germans aren't monsters from another planet. They're humans who made bad choices. And any of us could make those same choices under the right circumstances, the right pressures, the right fears. Steele took a drink, let the whiskey burn. That's what terrifies me. Not that Germans are evil, but that humans are capable of evil. Any humans. All humans. Including us. Including me. The conversation moved on. But Steele's words lingered. Hung in the air like smoke. Uncomfortable. True, impossible to ignore. This was layer 2, beneath the public confidence, behind the press conference certainty, closer to doubt, closer to honest questioning, still performed for an audience, still filtered through the lens of rank and roll, but more honest than the public mask. April 12, 1945. Late evening, past midnight, the kind of hour when only soldiers and drunks and people haunted by ghosts were still awake. Steele sat across from Nathaniel Garrett in the Supreme Commander's private office, a bottle of bourbon between them. Good bourbon, the 18-year Kentucky stuff. Smooth, expensive, the kind you save for important occasions or terrible news. 2 glasses, half empty, or half full depending on your philosophy. They'd removed their jackets. The ivory pistols sat on Garrett's desk. The riding crop leaned against Steele's chair. The symbols of authority set aside. Just 2 men, 2 friends, 2 humans trying to process what they'd seen and what it meant. How are you holding up, Marcus? Steele considered lying, considered the professional answer. Fine, sir. Ready for duty. But Garrett deserved better. Had earned honesty through decades of shared command. Honestly, Nate, I don't know. The Weber suicide, that's part of it, but not all. Steele poured himself another finger of bourbon, watched the liquid catch light. Amber, gold, beautiful and toxic at once. I keep thinking about what I did, forcing those people to see. Was it justice or was it just rage, revenge dressed up as accountability? Garrett leaned back. The chair creaked. Old wood, German furniture requisitioned from some wealthy family. Does it matter, Ma? It matters to me, Ma. Why? Because if I did it for justice, for history, for the right reasons, then I can live with the consequences. Weber's death, the trauma to those civilians, all of it, I can carry that weight. But if I did it because I was angry, because I wanted them to suffer, because I wanted revenge for what I saw, then I'm not sure I'm any better than... He stopped. Couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't say the words aloud. Then what? Then them, Garrett's voice was gentle. Understanding, not judging. Marcus, you're nothing like them. You saw evil and confronted it. They saw evil and enabled it. That's not the same thing, not even close. But I forced them, used military power to compel civilians, caused psychological trauma severe enough that 2 people killed themselves, destroyed their ability to live with themselves. How is that different from... Because your goal was to expose truth, not hide it, to create accountability, not escape it, to make sure this never happens again, not to perpetuate it. Garrett leaned forward, earnest, intense. You're questioning yourself because you're a good man. Bad men don't second-guess their actions. Bad men sleep soundly. You're losing sleep because you have a conscience. That's the difference. That's everything. Steele smiled without humor. That's convenient philosophy. It's also true. They sat in silence, the bourbon bottle slowly emptying. Outside, the camp sat quiet. Guards walked their rounds, normal, routine, as if the world hadn't changed. Did I do the right thing? Steele asked finally. The question that haunted him. The question he couldn't answer himself. Was I right to force them, right to destroy them, right to whatever I did? Yes. You sound certain. I am certain, and 50 years from now, when historians look back at this moment, they'll understand why. You didn't just liberate a camp. You created a record. You forced witnesses. You made it impossible for future generations to deny. You ensured that no one, not now, not ever, can say the German people didn't know. That matters. That changes everything. And the Webers made their own choices, every choice along the way. They chose silence. They chose comfort. They chose denial. And finally, they chose death. You didn't make those choices for them. You just presented them with truth. What they did with that truth was their decision, their responsibility, not yours. But Steele heard the words without fully believing them, because in his heart, in the place he didn't let anyone see, he wondered if forcing people to witness horror made him complicit in a different kind of cruelty. Not the cruelty of murder, not the cruelty of torture, but the cruelty of psychological devastation, of destroying someone's ability to function, of making reality so unbearable that death seemed preferable to life. Was that better? Was that justice? He didn't know. Might never know. What you did, Garrett said quietly, was necessary. Not good, not evil, just necessary. Sometimes that's all we can be. Men who do what's necessary even when we're not sure if it's right. Men who carry the weight of hard choices. Men who make the decision and live with the consequences. That's not very comforting. No, but it's honest. And right now, I think you need honesty more than comfort. You need someone to tell you the truth instead of making you feel better. Steele nodded, appreciated that. Garrett understanding what he needed, what would actually help versus what would just be empty platitudes. This was layer 3, the private conversation between friends, the honest doubts shared only with someone who'd earned that trust, the questions that had no good answers but needed to be asked anyway. Later that night, alone in his quarters, Steele opened his personal diary, the one no one ever saw. Not Brennan, not Garrett, no one. The place where Marcus Steele, the man, existed without Marcus Steele, the general, where he could be honest, vulnerable, human. His ivory pistols lay on the table beside him. The riding crop hung on a hook by the door. The instruments of authority that had changed history, that had forced people to see, that had destroyed comfortable lies. He wrote slowly, carefully, each word chosen with precision, each sentence weighed. This was for himself, for understanding, for processing, not for anyone else. April 12, 1945, I am haunted. Not by what the Germans did in that camp, though that's horrible enough. Not by the bodies or the hooks or the ovens. I'm haunted by how easily they did it, how ordinary people participated in extraordinary evil through small compromises and convenient blindness. But more than that, I'm haunted by my own capacity for cruelty. I forced civilians to witness horror, told myself it was for justice, for history, for the prevention of future atrocities. And all of that is true. All of that is real. I believe it. But it's also true that I wanted them to suffer, wanted them to carry the weight I was carrying, wanted them to be as broken as I felt, wanted them to hurt the way those prisoners hurt, not physically, but psychologically, spiritually, in whatever part of us holds our sense of self and worth and innocence. 2 people are dead because I made them see. Would they be alive if I'd shown mercy? If I'd been less absolute in my righteousness? If I'd given them a choice? I don't know. I keep asking myself, what's the difference between forcing people to witness evil and perpetrating evil myself? Where's the line between justice and revenge, between accountability and cruelty, between necessary harshness and unnecessary devastation? I wanted to believe I was different from the Germans who looked away, that I would have been brave enough to resist, to speak up, to act, to risk everything for what's right. But would I? Or would I have been Heinrich Weber, choosing comfort over conscience until forced to confront what I'd enabled? Choosing the safety of silence over the danger of truth, the truly terrifying question, am I any different from Weber now? He made choices that led to atrocity through inaction. I made choices that led to his death through action. Both of us told ourselves we were doing what was necessary. Both of us believed we were right. How do we know when we're right? How do we know when we've crossed the line from righteous to self-righteous, from justice to revenge, from accountability to cruelty? I don't have answers, only questions. And the growing certainty that forcing others to witness horror has fundamentally changed me in ways I don't fully understand, in ways I can't articulate, in ways that might not be reversible. I worry that I've become what I hate, not a murderer, not a torturer, but someone who wields power without fully considering the consequences. Someone who believes his righteousness justifies any action. Someone who's lost the ability to see himself clearly. God forgive me, I don't know if what I did was right or wrong. I only know it felt necessary, and that necessity feels like both vindication and damnation. Like I was right and wrong simultaneously. Like I served justice and committed cruelty in the same act. Maybe that's the truth. Maybe I was both. Maybe most hard choices are. But Weber is still dead. His wife is still dead. And I will carry that for the rest of my life, whether I should or shouldn't, whether I'm guilty or innocent, whether I was right or wrong. I will carry it because that's what it means to command, to choose, to act, to live with consequences. He closed the diary, stared at it for a long moment, then at his pistols, then at the riding crop, the instruments of his authority, the symbols of his power, the tools he'd used to force witnessing. They looked different now, not symbols of justice, but reminders of cost, evidence of choices made, weights to be carried. This was layer 4, the deepest truth, the doubt he couldn't speak aloud because generals weren't allowed to doubt, the questions that had no answers, the guilt that might or might not be deserved but existed nonetheless, the place where Marcus Steele was just a man, flawed, uncertain, haunted, human, and alone with his choices. May 1st, 1945. Steele visited the hospital where David Levin was recovering. 3 weeks of proper food and medical care had added 20 pounds to his frame. He still looked thin, still moved carefully as if uncertain his body would obey. But life had returned to his eyes, color to his face, humanity to his bearing. "General," Levin tried to stand. "Stay sitting, please. You are still recovering." Steele pulled up a chair, sat beside the bed, 2 men who'd been through hell together, who'd seen things that couldn't be unseen, who carried weight that couldn't be shed. "How are you feeling?" "Better, stronger. The doctors say I'll be able to leave soon. Go to a decamp, eventually emigrate. Start over." Levin paused. "Still hard to believe I'm alive, that this is real, that I survived." "You're a survivor, David. That takes strength most people don't have. Takes will, takes courage." Levin studied him, really looked at him, saw past the general's uniform and the polished boots and the ivory pistols, saw the man underneath. "You look tired, General, like you haven't slept." "Do I? The mayor's death, you've heard, yes." "Does it trouble you?" Steele considered lying, considered the professional response. But this man deserved truth, had earned honesty through suffering, through survival, through bearing witness. "Yes, it does. I wanted him to live with what he'd seen, to carry it, to remember, to wake up every morning knowing what he'd enabled. Instead, he escaped, took the easy way out." Death and escape. Levin's voice was soft, thoughtful, the voice of someone who'd considered this question deeply. "I've thought about dying many times, in the ghetto when the walls closed in Auschwitz when the selections happened daily, here when the beatings were worst. Sometimes death seemed like mercy, like release from unbearable weight. But you didn't. No, because I realized dying would let them win, would erase my testimony, my witness, my proof that this happened. So I chose to live, to remember, to tell what happened, even when living hurt more than dying would have." Steele felt something shift inside, a small release of tension, a weight redistributed slightly. "You freed me, General. Not just my body, but the truth. You made people see. You created a record. You forced witnesses. Because of you, this can never be denied, never be minimized, never be explained away. That matters. That's everything. 2 people are dead because I forced them to see. Thousands are dead because people refuse to see. Hundreds of thousands, millions. You didn't kill the Webers. Their guilt did. Their inability to live with what they'd enabled. Their decades of looking away. You just showed them the truth. What they did with that truth was their choice. Is there a difference? Yes, a crucial difference. You gave them truth. The rest was their decision, their responsibility." Levin paused, gathered his thoughts. "Don't carry their guilt, General. You have enough weight already, enough responsibility, enough burden. Don't add their choices to your load." "How do you do it? How do you carry what you've seen?" "I don't carry it alone. I share it, tell the story, bear witness, Make others carry pieces of it. That's why I survived. Not for myself, for testimony, for memory, for warning, so this never happens again. They sat together in comfortable silence, two survivors of different kinds of trauma, understanding each other in ways words couldn't quite capture. What will you do now, Steele asked, after you recover fully, after you emigrate? Live, marry if I can find someone who will have me, have children if possible, tell my story, make sure the world knows. What about you? The same, I suppose, in my own way. Make sure this is documented, remembered, never forgotten. Make sure the weight is carried forward, passed to the next generation, and the next, forever. Then we're in this together. Different roles, same mission. Steele smiled, first genuine smile in weeks. Yes, I suppose we are. One more thing, General. Levin's voice grew serious, intense. What you did forcing those people to witness that was right. Don't doubt it. Don't second guess it. They needed to see. The world needed them to see. History needed them to see. Some couldn't live with what they saw. That's tragic. But it doesn't make you wrong. It makes them complicit. Finally, honestly complicit. Steele nodded, absorbed that. Let it settle. When he left, he felt lighter. Not absolved, not forgiven, but understood, seen, witnessed himself. And somehow that helped. May 8th, 1945. Victory in Europe Day. The war was over. Germany surrendered unconditionally. Allied forces occupied Berlin. Celebrations erupted across Europe and America. Dancing in the streets, kissing strangers. Joy uncontained. But at Ohrdruf, the work continued. Documentation, photography, testimony, creating an indestructible record. The celebration would come later. First, the work. Steele stood at the camp entrance. Same spot where he'd stood 4 weeks ago when the smell first stopped his division. Everything had changed since then, and nothing had. He thought about the civilians he'd forced to witness, the soldiers he'd brought through, thousands of them now, each one changed, each one carrying pieces of the weight, each one a witness, the survivors he'd met, David Levin, Isaac, dozens of others. Some would live, some wouldn't. All would carry this forever. The weight of memory now distributed across thousands of people who couldn't forget even if they wanted to. Nathaniel Garrett had been right. Someday people would try to deny this happened, would claim exaggeration, propaganda, lies, allied fabrications, but they wouldn't succeed. Because of the photographs, the films, the testimony, the physical evidence, the thousands of witnesses, because Marcus Steele had made people see, not for revenge, not for cruelty, though those emotions had been there, been real, been part of it, but ultimately for the simple, terrible necessity of truth, for history, for memory, for ensuring that 50 years from now, 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now, people would know that evil existed, that ordinary people enabled it through small choices, that looking away had consequences, that silence was complicity and would choose differently. That was the hope anyway. The belief, the faith that memory could prevent repetition. That documentation could stop denial. That truth could triumph over lies. It had to be true, because if it wasn't, then what was the point of any of this? June 19th, 1945, 2 months after Ohrdruf. The camp had been documented completely, every angle, every horror, every piece of evidence. The survivors dispersed to DP camps and hospitals. The physical place would soon be demolished, but the memory would remain. Steele stood before a group of young officers being sent home. Their war was over. America awaited. Families, futures, lives. Gentlemen, he began, you've seen things most people can't imagine. You've witnessed both the best and worst of humanity. You are going home to families who won't understand, to communities that weren't here, to a world that wants to forget and move on, that wants to celebrate victory and return to normal. He paused. Let them absorb this. Let the reality settle. Don't let them forget. Don't let the memory fade. Not because we want to dwell on horror, not because we want to remain traumatized, but because forgetting is how it happens again. Because memory is the only defense against repetition. You who saw Ohrdruf, you who walked through those gates and witnessed, you carry responsibility now. The responsibility of memory, of testimony, of speaking truth even when it's uncomfortable, even when people don't want to hear it, even when it's easier to stay silent. Tell your children, Show them the photographs. Explain what happened when good people stayed silent, when ordinary citizens chose comfort over conscience, when looking away became national policy. This isn't just history, it's warning. It's instruction manual in how evil happens. It's proof that evil doesn't announce itself with fangs and horns. It arrives in small compromises, convenient lies, questions we choose not to ask, truths we choose not to see. His voice grew softer, more intense, more personal. You're going home to peace. Be grateful, celebrate, live your lives, but don't be complacent. Peace requires vigilance. Freedom requires courage. Justice requires people willing to see truth and speak it even when silence is easier. Be those people. Be the ones who don't look away, who don't stay silent, who choose conscience over comfort every single time, who witness, who document, who remember, who warn. Because the opposite of good isn't evil. It's indifference. It's looking away. It's choosing not to see. It's deciding that someone else will act. Someone else will speak. Someone else will take the risk. Never be indifferent. Never look away. Never forget. This story should never be forgotten. The officers sat silent. Some nodded. Some wiped eyes. All of them understood. They were witnesses now, carriers of memory, guardians of truth. And that was the most important duty any soldier could have. More important than combat, more important than victory, more important than medals or rank or glory. Witness, remember, tell, warn. That was their mission now, for the rest of their lives. Years later, the stories would emerge. Fragments, echoes of that April day when a general forced a town to see hell. When truth destroyed comfortable lies. When witnessing became justice. David Levin emigrated to America in 1946, settled in Brooklyn, married a woman named Sarah who'd survived Ravensbrück. They had 3 children, 7 grandchildren, 14 great-grandchildren by the time he died. He spent 50 years giving testimony, showed Elias Whitmore's photographs to school groups, spoke at universities, synagogues, churches, anywhere people would listen. Never let the memory fade. Never let the weight be his alone. When asked how he survived, he always said the same thing: I lived because someone needed to tell the truth, because General Steele made sure the truth couldn't be hidden, because witnessing matters. He died in 1995, 93 years old, surrounded by family who knew his story, who would tell their children, who would never forget. Corporal Elias Whitmore became a photojournalist. His Ordruff photographs hung in the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, in Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, in museums across the world. He covered the civil rights movement in the 1960s with the same unflinching eye he'd learned in Germany. Photographed lunch counter sit-ins, freedom rides, Selma, Birmingham, all of it. Ordruff taught me, he said in countless interviews, that the camera is a weapon against forgetting. That documentation matters more than comfort. That bearing witness is the most important thing any human can do. More important than safety. More important than neutrality. More important than anything. He died in 2003. His cameras donated to the museum. His photographs still teaching new generations what happens when good people look away. The town of Ordruff never forgot either. For decades, residents lived with the shame. Some left, couldn't bear the weight of proximity. Some stayed and built memorials, small plaques. A museum eventually, acknowledgement of complicity. In 1952, the town erected a monument at the former campsite. Simple, honest, brutal in its directness. In German and English, here stood Ordruff concentration camp. We knew we did nothing. We are sorry. May this never happen again. Not enough. Could never be enough. But something, a starting point, an admission, a vow. The town spent decades trying to atone. Education programs, memorials, testimony, the work of remembrance, the burden of complicity passed down through generations. And Marcus Steele, he served another 6 months after Germany surrendered, then retired. 61 years old, 38 years of service. Enough, more than enough. He returned to civilian life. Virginia, near Arlington, close to Washington, where he could visit the War Department, where he could continue the work. He never stopped telling the story, never stopped showing the photographs, never stopped insisting that this could never be forgotten. Spoke at West Point every year, at the War College, at synagogues and churches and town halls, anywhere people would listen. He spoke about Ordruff, about the forced witnessing, about the Weber's suicide, about the weight of command, about the cost of accountability, about the necessity of truth even when truth destroys. He kept his ivory pistols in a display case in his study. The riding crop hung above his desk. Reminders, symbols, the instruments that had changed history. In his later years, he wrote a memoir, published in 1968, dedicated it to David Levin and Heinrich Weber both, one man who survived, one man who couldn't, both victims of the same evil, both teachers of the same lesson, never look away. The dedication was controversial. Some said it equated victim and perpetrator. Steele didn't care. He'd meant what he wrote. Both men had taught him something. Both carried weight that mattered. In 1972, at age 87, Marcus Steele died quietly in his sleep. Heart failure. Quick. Peaceful. As much as any death can be peaceful. His final diary entry, written 3 days before his death, found by his daughter after April 4th, changed me forever. I still don't know if I was right to force those people to witness. I only know it felt necessary. I only know I would do it again. I've carried the weight of that decision for 27 years. The doubt, the guilt, the certainty that I crossed lines that shouldn't be crossed. The knowledge that 2 people died because I made them see truth. But I've also carried something else. The knowledge that thousands of people now remember, now know, now carry pieces of the truth. That denial became impossible. That the lie was destroyed, that history was served. Was I right? Was I wrong? I'll never know. But I know this, the opposite of good is not evil. It's indifference, it's looking away. It's choosing not to see. It's deciding that witnessing is someone else's responsibility. I was never indifferent. I made people see. I forced truth. I destroyed comfortable lies. I served justice even if I wasn't sure it was justice. I carried the weight even when the weight felt unbearable. If I have any legacy, let it be this. He made people see. He forced truth. He refused to let the world look away. He understood that witnessing is not optional, that memory is not negotiable, that truth matters more than comfort. And because of that, millions of children and grandchildren now know what happened. Millions of people carry the memory forward. The story continues. The warning persists. The truth survives. That will have to be enough. It has to be enough, because it's all any of us can do. Witness, remember, tell, warn, and refuse, absolutely refuse to look away. The sun sets over what used to be Ohrdruf concentration camp. The buildings are long gone, demolished in the late 1940s. Grass grows where barracks once stood. Trees shade the ground where bodies were stacked. But monuments remain. Photographs remain. Testimony remains. Memory remains. In museums around the world, visitors stand in front of images from April 1945. Images of civilians being marched through horror. Images of a general with ivory pistols and a riding crop pointing at bodies, forcing people to see. Some visitors cry, some rage, some stand silent, processing what humans did to other humans. What ordinary people enabled through small choices. But all of them see, all of them witness, all of them carry pieces of the weight forward, because Marcus Steele made sure they would, not with weapons, not with violence, but with the simple, terrible act of forced witnessing, of making truth unavoidable, of ensuring that looking away was no longer possible. He grabbed evil by the throat and made the world look at it. And the world has never forgotten. Somewhere in Brooklyn, David Levin's great-granddaughter teaches her son about the Holocaust, shows him the photographs, tells him great-great-grandpa David's story, shows him the picture of a general and a skeleton embracing. 2 men, 2 worlds, 1 moment of humanity. Why do we have to learn about this? The boy asks. 8 years old, innocent, safe. It's so sad. Because, she says, choosing her words carefully, forgetting is how it happens again. Remembering is how we stop it. Your great-great-grandfather survived so he could tell us, so we could tell you, so you could tell your children. The story doesn't end, can't end, must never end. She shows him another photograph. An American general, a town of Germans being marched through a camp, a moment when history pivoted. This man, she says, pointing to Steele, made people see, even when they didn't want to, especially when they didn't want to. He understood that witnessing is not optional, that looking away is choosing, that silence is complicity. Was he a good man? The boy asks. She considers. Long pause. Honest consideration. He was a man who did what was necessary, who served truth even when truth was brutal, who forced accountability even when accountability destroyed. Sometimes that's all we can be. People who choose the hard right over the easy wrong, who witness instead of look away, who speak instead of stay silent. The boy nods, studies the photograph. The general's face, hard, determined, uncompromising. The riding crop in his hand, the pistols at his hips, the absolute authority of righteousness, and something else, something in the eyes, something that might be doubt, might be pain, might be the weight of choices made, human, flawed, real. I'll remember, the boy says. Good, his mother replies. That's all anyone can ask. Remember, tell, warn, never look away. I won't. And somewhere in whatever place soldiers go when they die, Marcus Steele hears that promise, feels that commitment, knows that the work continues. The weight is carried forward, the memory persists, the truth survives. And that has to be enough. It is enough. Because this story should never be forgotten.